The hospital room was in complete disarray. A sharp, panicked energy filled the air as footsteps echoed down the hallways, accompanied by the frantic beeping of medical monitors and raised voices. Nurses rushed back and forth, calling for backup, while a doctor's voice cut through the noise. "He's out of control. Someone stop him." Amid the chaos, the source of the disturbance became clear. A large caramel-colored mutt stood firmly between the medical staff and the hospital bed, where a man lay intubated and unmoving. The dog's barking was relentless, sharp, and filled with desperation, making it impossible for anyone to get near the unconscious patient. "Get that dog out of here. He's going to knock everything over," one of the nurses shouted. The animal, Max, darted in circles around the room, blocking every attempt to approach the bed. A nurse stepped closer, only for Max to snarl and lunge, teeth bared, forcing her to stumble back in fear. Equipment wobbled dangerously, ready to collapse, as Max's frantic movements caused IV stands to topple and metal trays to crash to the floor. On the bed lay Jose, a man who had been in a coma for 3 long years. The machines keeping him alive beeped steadily, tubes connecting him to life support. For the hospital staff, today was supposed to mark the end. Jose's family had already signed the paperwork authorizing the machines to be turned off. The doctors were here to carry out the final procedure, but Max wasn't having it. The dog moved with precision, almost as if he understood exactly what was happening. His body was tense and ready to strike, guarding Jose like a soldier on duty. His eyes followed anyone who dared come close, filled with a silent warning. "Come near him, and you'll regret it." "Somebody restrain that dog," a doctor barked in frustration. "We don't have time for this. Just get him out of the way." The barking echoed down the hallway, sharp and unrelenting. Curious hospital staff peeked from doorways, whispering to each other, wondering what on earth was going on. Patients and visitors, too, stopped to listen, drawn by the chaos unraveling inside the room. Max continued to dart left and right, blocking every approach with precision. Each time someone tried to get close, he growled louder, his body trembling with fear and determination. His message was clear. No one was coming near Jose. The head nurse, realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped back and made a difficult call. "We need the fire department," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Minutes later, 2 firefighters rushed into the room, ready to deal with an out-of-control animal. Max didn't flinch. His barking filled the air as the firefighters approached, their calm voices doing little to soothe the dog. "Easy there, buddy." "It's okay," one firefighter coaxed, inching forward slowly. But Max growled low in his throat, his teeth flashing in the fluorescent light. When the firefighter took another cautious step closer, Max snapped his jaws inches from the man's arm. The firefighter jumped back, startled. "He's not backing down," he muttered to his partner. The second firefighter tried circling to the other side of the bed, hoping to catch Max off guard. But the dog's sharp eyes followed every movement, his body coiled and ready to lunge. "It's like he knows exactly what we're trying to do," one of the nurses whispered in disbelief. The doctors exchanged helpless glances. They had been through emergencies before, heart attacks, strokes, even violent patients, but nothing had prepared them for a dog with this kind of relentless determination. Finally, one of the firefighters raised his hands in defeat. "We're just making it worse by staying in here," he muttered. "Everyone back off, slowly." The medical staff exchanged uncertain glances, then reluctantly stepped away from the bed. As they retreated, Max's barking quieted, and his tense posture relaxed just slightly. His focus, however, never wavered. Once the staff had backed off, Max climbed onto the bed with Jose. With a heavy, determined motion, he curled his body across Jose's chest, guarding his friend like a shield. His eyes locked onto the humans around him, silently daring them to try again. It was as if Max was saying, "You're not turning him off, not while I'm here." For a moment, the entire room was silent, save for the steady hum of the life support machines. No one moved. No one knew what to do next. They had the paperwork. They had the medical authority. Everything was in place to disconnect Jose from the machines. But how could they move past a dog who refused to give up on him? Max's fierce protection wasn't something that appeared out of nowhere. It was rooted in a story that began 3 years earlier. It had been an ordinary afternoon at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City when the automatic doors of the emergency room slid open. What the staff saw next would stay with them forever. A lifeless man was being dragged across the sidewalk by a caramel-colored mutt, his jaws clenched tightly around the man's shirt collar. The dog's frantic barking echoed through the entrance, drawing the attention of nurses, paramedics, and security guards alike. One nurse, Elena, who was working that shift, recalled the moment vividly. "I thought I was hallucinating," she would tell others later. "A dog, dragging a man. How could something like that be real?" The man was Jose, and the dog was Max. At first, the staff thought it was some kind of bizarre accident, but as they rushed forward, they saw the urgency in Max's movements. The dog whined and barked non-stop, as if pleading with them to save his owner. And they did. Jose was admitted immediately, the doctors working feverishly to stabilize him. They discovered he had suffered a sudden, unexplained collapse, likely caused by a neurological event, but no one knew why. Without identification or emergency contacts, Jose was labeled as a John Doe. However, Max refused to leave the entrance. The hospital's security tried everything. They blocked the doors, they called animal control, but Max didn't give up. He sat outside, howling, scratching at the doors, making such a scene that the hospital finally caved. "Just let him in," Elena suggested. "Maybe he'll calm down." What none of them knew at the time was that Max wasn't just trying to stay with Jose. He was beginning a vigil that would last 3 long years. The first few days were the hardest. Hospital rules didn't allow animals in the ICU, but Max's presence in the waiting room created chaos. Every time they tried to move him out, he escaped. No matter how far they took him, Max would always find his way back, sneaking through open doors or barging in past visitors. Eventually, the hospital staff gave up. "Let the dog stay," the head nurse relented with a sigh. "If he's not leaving, we'll just have to figure something out." Over time, Max became part of the hospital's daily rhythm. He was always there, curled at the foot of Jose's bed or lying quietly beside the machines. Nurses would sneak him food, and doctors got used to his soft presence in the corner of the room. Max was calm most of the time, until someone touched the machines. Whenever a nurse reached to adjust the tubes or life support, Max would immediately sit up, watching intently. His eyes locked on the person's every move, not in anger, but in vigilant concern, as if making sure nothing bad would happen. "He's harmless," Elena would say with a laugh, "unless you try turning something off." And so it went, day after day, month after month. The hospital became used to Jose's strange companion, and eventually, so did the patients. Nurses and doctors began to root for them both, hoping Jose would wake up someday, though many doubted he ever would. The seasons changed, holidays passed, and life went on. Patients came and went, and the world outside continued to move forward. But Jose lay still, trapped in an unchanging limbo. And Max never left. Not for a day, not even for a moment. Then, 3 years into Jose's coma, the impossible happened. The hospital found his family. 2 sons, Daniel and Marco, were located through social services. They arrived at the hospital with awkward, guilty expressions. They hadn't been close to their father in years, and the sight of him lying unconscious in a sterile hospital bed stirred complicated emotions, part guilt, part resignation. The doctors explained Jose's condition. He was stable but unresponsive, with no signs of brain activity indicating he would ever wake up. His sons listened quietly, their faces pale. After a long discussion, the brothers made the hardest decision. They signed the paperwork to disconnect the life support machines. "He wouldn't want this," Daniel said with a shaky voice. "He's not coming back. We've kept him like this long enough." The doctors nodded in solemn agreement. It was time to let Jose go. The next morning, when the doctors arrived with the necessary equipment, Max immediately sensed the shift in the air. For 3 years, the dog had been calm, letting the nurses and doctors do their work without protest. But something about this visit felt different. Max knew somehow that they had come to do something final, something irreversible. He stood up, his body tense, and began growling, a low, dangerous sound that rumbled deep in his throat. The lead doctor tried to reason with the dog. "Easy, boy. We're not here to hurt him." But Max's growl intensified as the doctor moved closer to the machines. When the man's hand reached toward the ventilator, Max lunged forward with a bark so loud it echoed down the hallway. "Whoa! Get back!" a nurse cried, pulling the doctor away just in time. Max bared his teeth, snarling as he positioned himself between Jose and the medical staff. His eyes burned with determination. "He knows," Elena whispered, stunned by the intensity in Max's gaze. "He knows what we're about to do." The dog, who had spent 3 years quietly waiting by his owner's side, was now a fierce, unrelenting guardian. No one could get past him. Not the doctors, not the nurses, not even Jose's sons. "We can't do this," the lead doctor muttered, exasperated. "Not with him in the room." The head nurse sighed. "We need to get him out of here, or we'll never get this done." But no matter what they tried, soothing words, treats, even calling animal control, Max refused to move. His message was clear. "You're not taking him. Not while I'm here." The tension in the room felt unbearable. Doctors, nurses, firefighters, and Jose's sons stood frozen, helplessly watching Max, the stubborn caramel-colored mutt, stand his ground. He refused to let anyone near the machines. His barks were sharp and relentless, filled with desperation. He knew something was wrong, something no one else could understand. "We're going to have to sedate him," one of the doctors muttered, staring at the needle resting on a tray. But no one could bring themselves to do it. The sight of the dog, standing so fiercely by his owner, tugged at everyone's heart. Then, in the midst of the chaos, something unbelievable happened. A twitch. It was faint, so small it could have been missed, but Elena noticed it immediately. "Wait," she gasped, her heart skipping a beat. Did his hand just move? Everyone turned toward Jose, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for any sign that it wasn't just their imaginations. And then, his fingers twitched again. "Oh my God," whispered one of the nurses. He's moving." The room fell eerily silent as the subtle beeping of the heart monitor changed rhythm, signaling a shift in Jose's vitals. His chest expanded slightly, not much, but enough to make the doctors exchange stunned glances. Then it happened. Jose's eyelids fluttered, as if fighting off the weight of an endless sleep. His breath came in small, strained gasps, but it was unmistakably real. "He's waking up," Elena cried out, tears welling in her eyes. The staff rushed closer, but Max didn't bark this time. Instead, the dog climbed onto the bed, pressing his body against Jose, wagging his tail softly. It was as if Max knew. The moment they'd been waiting for was finally here. Jose's eyes opened, slowly and painfully, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. His gaze was unfocused at first, darting across the room, struggling to make sense of his surroundings. His breathing was shallow, but it was steady. One of the doctors leaned in, his voice gentle but urgent. "Jose, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can." For a moment, there was no response, and then Jose's fingers curled weakly around the doctor's hand. "He's responding," another nurse exclaimed, unable to contain her joy. Jose's sons, Daniel and Marco, burst into the room, their faces pale with shock. "Dad," Daniel whispered, stepping cautiously toward the bed. "Dad, is that really you?" Jose's gaze drifted toward his sons, slowly sharpening with recognition. A weak but unmistakable smile formed on his lips. "You came," he murmured, his voice raspy from years of silence. Tears brimmed in Marco's eyes as he choked out, "We thought you'd never wake up." But Jose's expression shifted, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "You gave up on me," he whispered, the words filled with quiet sorrow. Both sons froze, guilt washing over them in waves. "Dad, we didn't know what else to do. It's been 3 years." Daniel's voice cracked, barely holding back his tears. "We thought we were doing the right thing." Jose's eyes softened, but there was no anger, only sadness mixed with understanding. He gave his sons a slow, forgiving nod. "It's okay," he whispered, "but not Max. He never gave up." At the mention of his name, Max thumped his tail against the bed, his body pressing closer to Jose as if to say, "I told you I'd wait." Jose's weak hand reached out, brushing Max's soft fur. "My friend," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved me." The room buzzed with controlled chaos as doctors scrambled to check Jose's vitals. Machines beeped as they recorded the miraculous recovery, and nurses rushed to draw blood and check reflexes. The disbelief in the air was palpable. No one could explain how Jose had awakened after 3 years. "This shouldn't be possible," one of the doctors muttered, flipping through Jose's chart. "We've seen no sign of improvement, ever. And now he just wakes up?" Elena, still wiping tears from her eyes, looked toward Max, her voice filled with awe. "He must have known," she whispered. "That dog must have known he'd come back." Daniel and Marco stood by the bed, their guilt still fresh on their faces. We almost..." Marco stammered, unable to finish the sentence. Jose gave them a small, knowing smile, though the effort exhausted him. "I know." He looked down at Max, his hand never leaving the dog's fur. But he knew better. Max let out a soft huff, as if to confirm Jose's words. It wasn't long before the entire hospital knew what had happened. The man everyone thought was lost had returned, thanks to a dog's unwavering loyalty. The lead doctor stood by the bed, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't understand how this happened," he admitted, watching as Jose's pulse steadied on the monitor. Jose's gaze remained fixed on Max, a small smile playing on his lips. "You don't have to understand," Jose whispered, his voice weak but sure. "All you need to know is that I'm here, because of him." Max licked Jose's hand gently, his tail wagging with quiet joy. He had waited 3 long years for this moment, and now his mission was complete. The room, once filled with tension and fear, was now overflowing with relief and disbelief. The man who was never supposed to wake up was alive, smiling, and reunited with the dog who refused to leave his side. For everyone in that room, doctors, nurses, sons, and even skeptics, there was no doubt. Max had done the impossible. Jose lay back on the hospital bed, his body still weak but undeniably alive. Around him stood his sons, Daniel and Marco, the doctors and nurses, all trying to process the impossible. But none of them had any idea what Jose had truly endured. Only Max knew. After a long silence, Jose exhaled deeply, as if carrying the weight of years spent in isolation. Slowly, he began to speak, his voice raspy but deliberate. "I wasn't really gone," Jose whispered, his words making the room go still. Every pair of eyes locked onto him. The doctor standing closest frowned, confused. "What do you mean? You were in a coma for 3 years." Jose shook his head slowly, his gaze distant, haunted by what only he could remember. "It wasn't a coma. Not the way you think. I was awake, the entire time." Marco and Daniel exchanged looks, both stunned. "What do you mean, Dad?" Daniel asked carefully, his voice trembling. "You didn't move. You didn't respond to anything. How could you be awake?" Jose's gaze dropped for a moment before lifting to meet his sons. "I could see everything," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of the memory. "I was trapped, outside my own body. I tried to speak to you, to tell you I was still here, but no one could hear me." The room went dead silent. Not even the steady hum of the medical equipment could cut through the tension, thickening in the air. The staff listened in stunned disbelief. How could such a thing be possible? Jose took another slow, shaky breath, as if pulling his words from a place of deep sorrow. "It was like I was standing beside myself," Jose continued. "I could walk around the hospital, see everything happening, but I couldn't touch anything. I couldn't talk to anyone. I was invisible." His sons stared, frozen in shock. "You were like a ghost?" Marco asked, his voice barely audible. Jose nodded, his eyes clouded with emotion. "Exactly. A ghost in my own life. I saw it all. The doctors, the nurses, the holidays, and every time you came to visit." He looked at Daniel and Marco, his expression full of pain. "I heard every word you said, even the day you decided to let me go." Both sons stiffened. Marco ran a hand over his face, fighting the guilt that suddenly overwhelmed him. "We didn't know, Dad," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. We thought you were gone." Jose's face softened, but the sadness didn't leave his eyes. "You weren't wrong to think that." He paused, glancing down at Max, who lay by his side. But he knew. Max knew I was still here. At the sound of his name, Max wagged his tail softly, the rhythmic thumping a comforting sound in the heavy atmosphere. "He stayed with me the whole time," Jose whispered, his hand resting on Max's head. "He was the only one who knew. Every day, he stayed by my side. Even when I wanted to give up, he wouldn't let me." Jose's memories of the past 3 years were vivid. Too vivid. He remembered the frustration of being trapped in that limbo, drifting through the hospital like a lost soul. He watched the staff move around him, saw other patients recover and leave, and waited in silent agony as time dragged on. The worst part was watching his family lose hope. Every time Daniel and Marco visited, Jose stood beside them, begging them to notice him, to hear him. But no one ever did. Only Max sensed his presence. The dog remained vigilant, lying at the foot of his bed as if guarding Jose's very soul. "He was the only thing that kept me from letting go," Jose murmured. "I would have drifted away if it wasn't for him. Then, Jose reached the most painful part of his story, the moment the doctors came to disconnect his life support. That was when I felt it, the panic. I knew you were going to turn off the machines. Jose's voice trembled as he spoke. I could see it in Max's eyes. He knew too. That's why he fought so hard to stop you. He paused, his fingers tightening in Max's fur. When I saw how desperate he was, I knew I couldn't leave him. I couldn't let him be alone. Marco lowered his head, his guilt almost unbearable. We didn't know, he whispered. We didn't know you were still in there. Jose looked at his sons with quiet forgiveness. It's okay. I understand. He gave Max a soft smile, his voice breaking with emotion. But Max didn't give up. He wouldn't let me go. Not for 1 second. Max gave a soft huff, as if confirming the truth of Jose's words. Jose's voice dropped to a whisper as he described the final moments of his out-of-body experience. I could feel everything slipping away. I knew if I didn't try one last time, I'd be lost forever. He closed his eyes briefly, as if reliving the moment. I looked at Max, and I saw the fear in his eyes. I knew I couldn't leave him. If I did, no one would understand what he had done for me. With a shaky breath, Jose opened his eyes again. So I jumped. I threw everything I had left into that last moment and fought my way back into my body. He exhaled deeply, the memory still fresh and raw. I don't know how I did it. All I know is that 1 second, I was a ghost, and the next, I opened my eyes. The room remained silent, the weight of Jose's story settling over everyone like a heavy fog. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, still struggling to make sense of what they had just heard. How could such a thing be possible? But for Jose, there was no need for explanations. He looked down at Max, his faithful companion, and smiled. I came back because of him, Jose whispered. Not because of medicine or machines, because he never gave up on me. Max wagged his tail slowly, his bright eyes filled with quiet joy. Daniel and Marco stood by the bed, tears streaming down their faces. They leaned in close, their hands resting gently on their father's shoulder. We're so sorry, Dad, Daniel whispered. We should have believed. We should have waited longer. Jose gave a small, forgiving smile. It's okay, he said softly. I'm here now, thanks to Max. And with those words, the bond between man and dog, a bond that had defied death itself, was stronger than ever. The story of Jose and Max spread like wildfire through the halls of Mount Sinai Hospital. Nurses, doctors, and staff whispered the incredible tale in disbelief, replaying the moment when a man, believed to be lost forever, opened his eyes thanks to the unwavering loyalty of a dog. But the story didn't stop there. The media quickly caught wind of the miracle, and soon, reporters flooded the hospital. News cameras rolled as anchors recounted the heartwarming tale. A loyal dog named Max, who refused to leave his unconscious owner's side for 3 years, and his persistence that ultimately saved Jose's life. Jose and Max became instant sensations. The duo was invited to TV interviews, talk shows, and news programs where Jose described the surreal experience of being trapped between life and death, only able to feel the presence of his faithful dog, Max. On one of the most emotional interviews, the host leaned forward, clearly moved. Do you really think Max knew that he kept you here, waiting for you to wake up? Jose didn't hesitate. I know it, he answered. Max is the reason I'm alive today. He never gave up on me, even when everyone else did. At Jose's side, Max rested his head on Jose's lap, looking up at his owner with those same bright, knowing eyes. His tail wagged softly, as if to say, "I told you I'd wait." The story touched the hearts of millions. Photos of Max, curled protectively beside Jose's lifeless body, went viral, circulating on social media with captions about love, loyalty, and never giving up on those we care about. People from all over the world sent messages of support, thanking Jose for sharing his journey and marveling at the dog who refused to leave his side. Hospitals and caregivers across the country drew inspiration from the story, using it as a symbol of hope for patients who seemed beyond reach. Patients' families, struggling with decisions about life support, found themselves reconsidering. "If Jose could wake up, maybe my father can too," whispered one woman to a nurse as they discussed keeping her father on life support a little longer. Meanwhile, Jose and Max's lives changed, but in the best way possible. With the money Jose earned from interviews and public appearances, he made some much-needed changes. He renovated his small apartment, making it comfortable not just for himself, but also for Max. He installed a fenced backyard, where Max could run free after years of being confined to the hospital. And every day, they went on long walks together, savoring the fresh air and freedom they both had fought so hard for. "He just wants his walks and belly rubs," Jose joked during one interview. "The fame doesn't mean much to him." They also became frequent visitors at Mount Sinai Hospital. Jose made a point to visit patients and their families, sharing his story of survival and encouraging them not to give up hope. Max was always at his side, a living symbol of loyalty and perseverance. Patients smiled when Max entered their rooms, some reaching out just to touch him, as if his presence could somehow transfer a bit of his unyielding spirit. "He's like a little guardian angel," one nurse whispered as Max lay at the foot of a patient's bed, his calm presence bringing comfort to the room. Jose would often sit with families struggling to make difficult decisions, speaking from his heart. "It's not just about the machines or the doctors," he would say. "Sometimes love and loyalty can bring someone back from the edge. I know that better than anyone." While Jose and Max became household names, for Jose, the real reward wasn't the fame or the attention. It was the time they had been given together. One evening, as they sat on the couch in their cozy apartment, Jose ran his hand through Max's soft fur. "You gave me my life back, Max," Jose whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how you did it, but you never gave up on me." Max looked up at Jose, his bright eyes filled with affection, and gave a soft, content sigh, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. For Max, there was no need for grand gestures. He had his best friend back, and that was all that mattered. Their story continued to inspire thousands. News outlets followed their journey for months, sharing updates on Jose's recovery and Max's antics. Schools and hospitals used their story as a lesson in hope and perseverance, reminding people that sometimes the most extraordinary acts of love come from the most unexpected places. Even skeptics, who initially dismissed the story as coincidence, found it hard to deny the connection between Jose and Max. "How can you explain a dog knowing his owner wasn't gone?" one reporter asked a doctor. "Science can't measure that kind of loyalty." "It doesn't need to," Jose answered with a smile when asked about the same thing. "I know what happened, and so does Max." Each day for Jose and Max became a celebration of the life they fought to reclaim. They walked through the park every morning side by side, Max's leash held loosely in Jose's hand. They took nothing for granted, not the crisp morning air, not the quiet moments shared at home, and certainly not each other. And through it all, Jose knew one thing for certain. No matter what happens, we'll face it together.